So now it's time to explore the anatomy of the circulatory system, that is, the blood vessels. The body's vessels, as you'll recall, are divided into the pulmonary circuit, which includes the vessels that carry blood to the lungs and back, and also the systemic circuit, which is made up of vessels that carry blood from the heart to the rest of the body and back. The pulmonary circuit is made up of vessels that convey blood from the right ventricle to the pulmonary arteries, to the lungs, to the alveolar capillaries, and back through the pulmonary veins that lead from the lungs to the left atrium. You can see that exhibited in this figure here. So the pulmonary circuit again, very simple for us to remember relative to everything else. It moves through the pulmonary arteries into the lungs, where those arteries divide into the alveolar capillaries. The alveolar capillaries then will converge to form the pulmonary veins, which return into the heart. The systemic circuit includes the aorta, which has many branches that lead to all the body tissues, as well as a system of veins that return the blood to the right atrium. This is a much more complex circuit. We'll spend the majority of the rest of this chapter looking at those vessels. The arterial system begins with the aorta. The aorta is here. It's the body's largest artery. There are many branches that come off of the aorta. I like to think of it like it's a highway and there are different exits. So you might count the exit numbers to get to each of these different branches. Now, you don't need to know nearly all of the arteries or veins in the circulatory system, but there are some key ones that you'll need to find in Anatomy and Physiology Revealed. To begin with, we have the ascending aorta, and it arches back over the heart and descends through the thoracic cavity and the abdominal pelvic cavity. As it arches over, we'll see our first exits. We'll see the brachiocephalic artery first. On the right side, the brachiocephalic artery will divide into the subclavian and the common carotid arteries. The next exit we'll see is the left common carotid, and then the left subclavian. So you'll notice, on the right side, the brachiocephalic artery gives rise to both the right common carotid and right subclavian arteries. However, on the left side, there is no brachiocephalic artery. We just go straight to the left common carotid and the left subclavian. As the aorta descends through the thoracic cavity, it gives rise to many smaller arteries that fuel the thoracic wall and the thoracic viscera. We won't be naming all of these. However, once the aorta descends into the abdominal cavity, it gives rise to the following branches. First, we'll see the celiac artery. The celiac artery goes to supply many of the digestive organs. Next, we'll see the superior mesenteric artery. The mesenteric artery goes and supplies all the mesenteries, the membranes that hold up the small intestine. We'll then see the suprarenal artery that supplies the adrenal glands. And then we'll see the renal artery that supplies the kidneys. We'll also see the gonadal artery, which supplies the ovaries or testes. Next, the inferior mesenteric artery. This supplies some of the large intestine. And then we'll see that the descending aorta splits into the common iliac arteries, one on the right and one on the left. So of all the vessels that we see, these are the only ones you'll be held responsible for. Spend the time now and go and look at the branches off of the aorta in Anatomy and Physiology Revealed. Next, let's look at the head, neck, and brain. Arteries to the head, neck, and brain include branches of the subclavian and common carotid arteries. Here you can see the subclavian and the common carotid artery. Remember, on the right side, they branch off of the brachiocephalic artery, but on the left side, we go directly into subclavian and common carotid. The vertebral arteries will branch off and supply the vertebrae and their associated ligaments and muscles. How do we supply the brain with blood is the main question. The vertebral arteries will ascend into the brain and unite to form the basilar artery. The basilar artery ends as two posterior cerebral arteries. You can see these clearly here. These posterior cerebral arteries help form the circle of Willis. The circle of Willis is as far as we'll go here, because it's from the circle of Willis that many branches arise that will allow supply of blood to the whole brain. The right and left common carotid arteries diverge into the external and internal carotid arteries. The external carotid artery will ascend to supply tissues outside of the cranial cavity, and the internal carotid artery will go up through the base of the skull and inside the brain to supply the brain tissues. It will finish off the circle of Willis. We'll see inside the internal carotid artery that there are baroreceptors and chemoreceptors. These detect changes in the blood before it enters the brain so that we can have a response as quickly as possible and make sure the brain is supplied with the freshest, most high-quality blood possible. Again, go to Anatomy and Physiology Revealed and find these various arteries. Get familiar with them before you move on to the next section. Here we go. Arteries of the shoulder and upper limb. We see the subclavian artery. Subclavian meaning subclavicle, yes, and it continues into the arm. When it enters the arm, it'll become the axillary artery. That is as it passes through the armpit. In the shoulder region, the axillary artery will become the brachial artery. The brachial artery will then in turn give rise to the ulnar and radial arteries. These are the only arteries that you need to know in the shoulder and upper arm. Again, go to Anatomy and Physiology Revealed and find them. What's the best way to handle all of this material? Remember what we did with the skeletal system, forming an outline? An outline of each of these different sections will be immensely valuable in helping you learn all of these different arteries and veins. Now let's look at arteries to the thoracic and abdominal walls. Branches of the thoracic aorta and the subclavian artery supply the thoracic wall with blood. Branches of the abdominal aorta, as well as the other arteries, supply the abdominal wall with blood. That is, the walls of the cavity, as opposed to the organs inside the cavity themselves. You don't need to know the names of each of these branches, but just be aware of how those body walls get their blood supply. Now we look at arteries of the pelvis and lower limb. At the pelvic brim, the abdominal aorta divides into the common iliac artery on either side. This further divides into the internal iliac artery and the external iliac artery. The internal iliac artery supplies blood to the pelvic muscles and all the visceral structures of the pelvis, and the external iliac artery leads into the legs, where it becomes a number of different vessels. We need to know the femoral artery. That's the one that moves right down along the femur. The popliteal artery as it passes through the knee. The anterior tibial artery in the lower leg, and the posterior tibial arteries. Again, these are all the arteries that you need to know in the pelvis and lower limb. Put them into an outline. Go out into Anatomy and Physiology Revealed and find these vessels now while it's fresh, and then come back. We'll move into the next section. The venous circulation returns blood to the heart after the blood and body cells exchange gases, nutrients, and wastes. The larger veins parallel the courses of the arteries and are named accordingly, so you've already done half the learning. However, some of the smaller veins take some irregular pathways, and we won't be naming them. Veins of the head and upper torso drain into the superior vena cava, and veins from the lower body will drain into the inferior vena cava before they enter the right atrium. These vena cava actually merge as they join the right atrium. We'll begin by looking at the head and neck. The jugular veins are the veins that drain the head and unite with the subclavian vein. As with the carotid arteries, there's both an internal and external jugular vein. The subclavian veins will then join to form the brachiocephalic veins. In the upper limb, we have corresponding veins to each of the arteries. The upper limb is drained by both superficial and deep veins. The basilic and cephalic veins are the major superficial veins. And the major deep veins include the radial, ulnar, brachial, and axillary veins. So some common themes here from what we saw in the arteries. Those are the only ones that you need to know in the shoulder and upper limb. Go ahead, add them to your outline now. Go to Anatomy and Physiology Revealed, find them there. Then we'll move on to the next section where we look at the veins of the abdominal and thoracic walls. Tributaries of the brachiocephalic and azygous veins drain the abdominal and thoracic wall. Blood draining from the intestines enters the hepatic portal system. We saw a portal system in the hypothalamus and pituitary. This is the second portal system that we see in the human body. Remember, a portal system is a capillary bed connected to another capillary bed. So blood flows to the liver first so that it can be cleaned, and then it flows into general circulation. The liver can process the nutrients that have been absorbed during digestion, as well as remove bacteria and other toxic products. The hepatic veins then drain the liver, and the gastric veins drain the stomach. We'll see a corresponding superior mesenteric vein and an inferior mesenteric vein draining the large intestine and small intestine, respectively. The splenic vein leaves the spleen as well as the pancreas. Now let's look at veins in the lower limb and pelvis. Again, there are deep and superficial veins. The deep veins include the anterior and posterior tibial veins, which unite to form the popliteal vein and the femoral vein. The superficial veins include the small and great saphenous veins. All of these veins merge to empty into the common iliac vein. So, we've already had a lot of these names before. They should be coming familiar to you. Put them all in an outline so that you know exactly what you're responsible for as far as the venous supply. Once you have your whole outline, go back into Anatomy and Physiology Revealed. See what you can find. Don't forget, use their quizzing functions so that you can identify things on the go. That brings us to the end of this chapter. We'll see you again soon for the next chapter.